Well, I don't know how old you were when you first uttered these words, but try to remember. That's not fair. How old were you when you first uttered the words, that's not fair? Or how recent was it that you uttered the words, that's just wrong? That's just wrong. Something about that is wrong. That's just wrong. We get to continue a series that we began, and I'm going to give you a little bit of background because some are jumping in the series right now. It's a series that looks at the epic story of Joseph's life. Joseph is one of those figures in the Old Testament we get a lot of history about, one of the rare ones. And his story is one of those that is so remarkable, it ends in a statement that is incredibly inspiring on one side, like this is aspirational, I wish I was like that, and almost sounds fake. You're like, no, you didn't really, right? The guy lived in denial, he just kind of whatever. I didn't mean the pun there, but for those that are quick, you caught it. And it just seems almost unbelievable, a little bit too good to be true, but yet these words are what this whole series was built on. In chapter 50 of Genesis is the culmination, his story, his life, after all that Joseph had been through at the hands of his brothers who hated him, who were jealous of him, who seemingly sent his course on a life of destruction, down a road of destruction. They're now standing before him, and he has, as the most powerful man in the world next to Pharaoh, holding the fate of their lives in his hands, and they're groveling. Dad is now passed away. They think the only reason Joseph was nice to them the first time was because Dad was still alive. Dad has now passed. Now they think their day has come. The reckoning is coming. You're about to get a taste of what you deserve. Joseph is about to get even with us. And they grovel, and Joseph says to them, guys, am I in the place of God? Meaning that there's a place for this righting of wrongs and straightening the ship or closing the accounts. And there's a place that God will play in that for sure. But as for you, you meant evil against me. I know you did. You know you did. I know you did. But God meant it for good. And he goes on to say that there would be the saving of lives. God was doing something actively to bring salvation into people's lives, to save people, you included, to save lives, he tells them. And says, so he spoke kindly to them. I'm going to take care of you and continue to do good to you. Not only do I not want to get even with you, I actually want to do you good. Now that picture is powerful. That's chapter 50 of Genesis. But that comes now 30 years after they threw him in a pit. A lot had happened in Joseph's life. And in that season, a lot of it wasn't good, at least on the surface. What we're speaking about, what we talked about last week, we talked about the pain of rejection. We talked about this week, we're talking about overcoming injustice. Injustice is done in his life. Things done to him that he had no power over. And we talked about, even as believers, as Christians, the concept or the understanding that while we walk through this life, because you know the Lord, just because God is good, doesn't mean that this world is going to be full of only good. It's full of all kinds of stuff. The presence of evil is real. Our own sin nature is real. And because of that, there's a lot of things that just really suck. They hurt. There's pain. There is suffering in this world. There is suffering in our lives. But the reality is that if I know the Lord, here's what God is committed to do. Not remove or keep me from experiencing life. But he'll be with me in it and through it. And he'll walk with me in the hard parts, and he'll walk with me in the painful parts. And more than anything else, he will prevent those things from becoming what defines my life or ruins my life. Joseph's statement is that with the presence of evil, you intended evil, there's also the presence of God's goodness in my life. God intended good. And God is still able to be working toward or working for the good in your life and in my life, no matter what or despite whatever comes into our lives. And so we're going to talk about overcoming injustice today. Now, as you read about it in the Old Testament, the word just or justice has a couple of connotations that are pretty powerful, different words actually in the Hebrew. One speaks about primary justice, speaking about kind of living our lives in a just way or righteous way. It's an interchangeable word in the Old Testament. Primary justice, living in a right way, living rightly with each other. If we all treated each other the way we were intended to treat one another, with value and love and dignity, if we all lived just, we all lived fairly, if we all lived in a way that was equal to all and cared about one another, this is the primary justice. Then we wouldn't have to even deal with this other justice called rectifying, or kind of thought of as rectifying justice, punishing wrongdoers and caring for victims, mishpat in the Hebrew. It's making things right. It's this other part of what happens when things aren't just. How do we make them just again? And both concepts are there in the Hebrew and all through and in the New Testament. In fact, in the ESV, in the New Testament, the word for just is really translated righteous over and over again. It's interchangeable there in the New Testament. What happens when our lives encounter circumstances that aren't just? What happens? Now, everybody's circumstance is different. Like we talked about at the very beginning, pain and suffering, you can't compare one person's to another. It doesn't work that way. Because you're the one going through it. And so it's real to you. And you have to experience it in a way somebody else can't experience yours. And we talked about, hey, listen, if I talk about suffering, and I compare myself to somebody who's been through wrongful imprisonment, somebody who's walked through incredible illness in their life, I just go, well, I got nothing to say, so therefore mine isn't valid or relevant. And that's not true. It's what I've been dealing with. But injustice is another one of those. So when someone says injustice, it's very easy for us to look outside of how it touches our life and just look at how it touches everybody or somebody else's life. But in the message today, we're talking about that second form of justice, the one rectifying justice, dealing with how do things get made right when they're wrong in our lives? How do we deal with the pain? And the only way this message will speak to your heart is if you look at it from your own lens about how it impacts or has impacted your own life. And the declaration today is that even in the presence or in a world that experiences and doles out lots of inequity and lots of injustice, you won't be overcome by it. It doesn't define your destiny. Because you've got a just God who is guiding you, walking with you all the way through. And you've got a way to be free from the pain that's associated with it in your life. And those are the things we're going to come out. Those are the lessons out of Joseph's life. Let me read the story because it's a little bit of a long story. Not everybody knows it, so I never assume everybody knows the story of Joseph. Awesome story to go back and read for yourself. But we're going to pick it up in verse 39. His brothers had already thrown him in the pit. They took his coat and smeared it with blood. and gave it to dad, said, what, is this your son's coat? I wonder what happened to him. And dad goes, he's dead, he's gone. My son Joseph has been torn apart by by a wild beast, and he's in mourning. Meanwhile, what they really did was they sold Joseph into slavery and got some money for him. And that's where the story picks up in verse 39. It says, now Joseph had been brought down to Egypt, and Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, the captain of the guard, he would be the head of the secret service, an Egyptian, had bought him from the Ishmaelites who brought him down there. Now the Lord was with Joseph. Now hear that. You're going to hear that more than once in this. It's important. The Lord was with Joseph, and he became a successful man, and he was in the house of his Egyptian master. His master saw that the Lord was with him. There it is again. And the Lord caused all that he did to succeed in his hands. So Joseph found favor in his sight and attended him. And he made him overseer of his house and put him in charge of all that he had. From that time that he made him overseer of his house and over all that he had, the Lord blessed the Egyptian's house for Joseph's sake. The blessing of the Lord was on all that he had in the house and in the field. So he left all that he had in Joseph's charge, and because of him, he had no concern about anything but the food that he ate. So Joseph, now a slave, brought into the house of the captain of the guard. The captain of the guard recognizes something's different about him. Everything I ask him to do seems to get better. I like this. And so he has favor in his eyes, and he begins to rise through the ranks of the house slaves until he's over everything in the house, literally. Every single decision is now being made by Joseph. Potiphar says, I don't need to worry about any of it. This guy's got it, and he does it better than me, except for the food. I got to take care of the food. That's my thing. The Egyptian diet was actually pretty complicated, and you wanted to make sure it was done right. Now, Joseph was handsome in form and appearance. It's actually the only time this phrase is used this way of a man in the Old Testament. Joseph was a handsome dude. And after a time, his master's wife cast her eyes on Joseph and said, lie with me. But he refused and said to his master's wife, behold, because of me, my master has no concern about anything in the house and has put everything that he has in my charge. He is not greater in this house than I am, nor has he kept back anything from me except you, because you are his wife. How then can I do this great wickedness and sin against God? And she spoke to Joseph day after day, and he would not listen to her, to lie beside her or to be with her. But one day, when he went into the house to do his work, and none of the men of the house was there in the house, she caught him by his garment, saying, lie with me. And he left his garment in her hand and fled and got out of the house. And as soon as she saw that he had left his garment in her hand and fled out of the house, she called to the men of her household and said to them, see, he has brought among us a Hebrew to laugh at us. He came in to me to lie with me, and I cried out with a loud voice. And as soon as he heard that I lifted up my voice and cried out, he left his garment beside me and fled out of the house. Then she laid up his garment by her until his master came home, and she told him the same story. So the scene in the picture is exactly the way it's probably being painted in your head. She sees him, he's a handsome dude. He's still a slave in the house. She does have the power. She's married to the man of power. And she doesn't take no for an answer. And she doesn't take no for an answer. And she doesn't take no for an answer. And it's day after day after day. Oftentimes, even the reverse of what happens in certain workplaces or in situations today. Of a man in power coming and coming and coming and coming and trying to impose. Here it's the woman in power. And Joseph says no, but he gives 3 reasons for no, and really they all have to do with, 1, it would be wrong to my master. He's entrusted me with everything. it wouldn't be right, it wouldn't be just. It wouldn't even be just before all of the God of the entire heaven. He uses a different word for God there than the Lord. Instead of Yahweh, it's Elohim. It's the God of everything, probably even saying to her, and even you know, this isn't right. I can't sin against him. One day the situation arises and it seems like she's kind of got him in a compromised spot, but he still runs out. He has to leave his cloak behind because she's holding on, and he runs out, and then all of a sudden the picture is now a different picture because now she's got his cloak and he ran out without it. Now it's all gonna get told. So she better craft the story quick and she better make it fast. I'm going to tell the story, and I'm going to be the one who writes what happened here. And all of it leads to Joseph. She tells it to her husband. This is what he did. It says the husband is angry, he's mad, he's furious. Joseph goes into the king's prison once again, never recording the opportunity to even hear his side of the case. So this is now twice that he is, in a sense, a victim of injustice. Both going into being trafficked into slavery and also now being accused without even the facts, wrongfully accused, and now put in prison again. That's the picture. Now, what are the stories? What are the lessons that we gather from here? One is this: we are not defined by injustice. Our lives are not defined by injustice. Joseph's life, this is it. It's leading to chapter 50, where he's able to look his brothers in the eye one more time and tell them, you meant it for evil, but God meant it for good. I am not in the place of God. There is a God, and he is just, and he will judge. Everything gets judged. And I'll let him do what he's going to do. But as for me, I'm going to do you good, because God put me here to do good. By the way, God put you here to do good. Do you hear that this morning? God put you here to do good, to love, to demonstrate who he is, that people might see who he is through your life. But we are not defined by injustice. Have you ever felt powerless or at the mercy of someone or something unjust? Have you ever wanted to plead your case and someone wouldn't listen? Have you ever been in a situation or a circumstance where others were favored above you and you could not break through no matter what you did? Have you ever been put in a place where you didn't have say over what was being done to you in a negative way? Has any of that ever touched your life? It touched Joseph's life in every deep and powerful and profoundly painful way you can imagine. Question is, in the midst of that, do you believe that God can make you a successful person even in an unjust situation, an unjust job, an unjust society? Or is your life at the mercy that everything has to be just in order for you to be successful? And I'm talking to you, Christian. I'm talking to you, Christian. In order for you to be a successful parent, does society have to be just? Or can you be a successful parent in raising your kids? Can you be successful in your finances and in your life, even if circumstances around you are not just? How about as an athlete? You know, it's interesting, 4 times in this chapter, it declares that God was with Joseph. It didn't look like it. You wouldn't imagine it, but 4 times in this chapter alone, it just makes a declaration, but God was with him. But things were unjust, yes, but God was still with him. But it wasn't right what happened to him, yes, but God was still with him. And Joseph was learning in that moment what was going to set him up for chapter 50. That even in unjust circumstances, my life is not at the mercy of what I can't control. Do you hear that? Because the enemy would want Joseph to believe it. He'd want you to believe it, that unless you can get justice in your own life, you are stuck. Unless you can get this right, unless it can be made right, you can't go forward. You can't get ahead. You can't provide. You can't be a parent. That's what the enemy tries to say. But in the midst of all of that, out of Joseph's story, out of the entire scripture, we read God is still with you, working for the good. And if God's with you, it's enough. In Philippians, you have Paul writing. He's in prison in Rome, about to be martyred, all because of his declaration of Jesus Christ, the Son of God, who came to save sinners, of which he said, I'm the chief of them all. And now, having given his testimony, he'll give it one more time before the emperor of Rome, before he is martyred. And he's telling the Philippians, read between the lines, I'm not stuck. I want you to know, brothers, that what has happened to me has served to advance the gospel, so that it's been known throughout the whole imperial guard and to the rest that my imprisonment is for Christ. He's imprisoned for Christ. He's not stuck. He's not getting justice. But he's not stuck. He's saying, listen, I want you to know that it's become obvious to everybody why I'm here. And it's gotten through the entire imperial guard. Everybody's learning my story, that I'm here because of Jesus. That's not the words of somebody stuck. Joseph chose to recognize that his life was defined by God's presence. God was with him. Second lesson we learn is that we're guided by a just God. We're guided by a just God. God was with him, but also God was guiding him. Every step, even if it started wrong, was still being guided by God. How did he get to be second to Pharaoh? Well, one, he had to get to Egypt. And two, he had to meet the person that would introduce him to Pharaoh. And guess where he meets that man? In prison. These two circumstances, both of injustice in his life, were guiding him on the road that would eventually lead him to having a conversation with Pharaoh that would put him in second in command. Your life is being guided by a just God. God sees everything. He ignores nothing. And if you understand that, that gets into your spirit as a man, as a woman, and says, listen, God, I'm not in your place, but I know you see, and I know that you're with me, and I know that even though these circumstances seem wonky and messed up and all that, you are still guiding my life. Listen, have you ever wanted to get even with someone for what they did to you? Anybody? Okay, by a show of hands, how many of you have ever wanted to get even with somebody for what they did to you? Anybody find yourself days, years, weeks, months down the road rehashing a situation and thinking about how you want to get even with what they did to you? Anybody ever been there? Yeah, and it all stirs up all over again, like it's just fresh. Just wait. Just wait. One day I'll be in a position where I will get to give it to you. And that is exactly where Joseph found himself. And yet when he was in that position to give it to them, he did them good instead. It's the kind of man I want to be. It's the kind of friend I want to be. It's the kind of person I want to be. It's right, it's better, but it's not normal. How do you get there? You discover these things about God in the midst of your pain. That he's just and that he's got me and that he's leading me through this moment. That he'll handle what I don't have the capacity to handle. He'll make right things that may never get made right on the earth today. And so in Romans, Paul writes these words: repay no one evil for evil. You don't have to get even with everybody. In fact, don't get even with others by doing wrong to them because they wronged you. Give thought to do what is honorable in the sight of all, if possible. As far as it depends on you, on your part, live peaceably with everyone. That's the posture to take as a follower of Christ. I'm going to live peaceably with those around me. What about those who hate me, those who have done evil to me? Listen, as far as it depends on you, in the part that you can play, live at peace with those. Beloved, never avenge yourselves. Never fight to have to get even. Don't let that reside in your heart. Don't let it eat you up. Don't let it sit there and fester and pollute your soul and corrupt your heart. Never avenge yourselves, but leave it to the wrath of God. Joseph saying in chapter 50, am I in the place of God? Leave it to the wrath of God. For it is written, vengeance is mine, I will repay, says the Lord. To the contrary, if your enemy is hungry, feed him. If he's thirsty, give him something to drink. For by so doing, you'll heap burning coals on his head. It was a phrase used in the Middle East at that time that speaks about, listen, you're giving the opposite. You're doing what's right, and they got to deal with that. Let it fester in them. How can they be kind when I'm cruel? Let that fester in their hearts and burn in their liver, is another phrase from that time. Not because you're trying to heap that, it will heap that. The effect of doing good instead of returning evil for evil. If you're instead, to the contrary, if your enemy is hungry, your enemy is hungry. If your enemy is hungry, feed him. If he's thirsty, give him something to drink, for by so doing, you'll heap the burning coals on his head. Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. Listen, when Joseph was in that place of power, it wasn't just his brothers that probably took a deep gulp. Imagine Potiphar now, assigned to his protection. Imagine Potiphar's wife now. Talk about uh-oh. They had uh-ohs, I guarantee it. And yet, it says nothing about him getting even with them. And then lastly, let me just say this. The wounds of injustice can be healed. If they couldn't be healed, Joseph could not say what he said and do what he did in chapter 50. If injustice cannot be healed, then you who've experienced it in your life, then your life is over. It's ruined. It's corrupted. Injustice can be healed because God is with us, guiding, and he will make all things just. Injustice can be healed. How is it healed, though? I want you to read these words with me, spoken about Jesus in Isaiah 53, 700 years before Messiah came. It told us all about him and what he would experience. And part of what it says he'll experience was this: he was oppressed and he was afflicted, yet he opened not his mouth. Like a lamb that is led to the slaughter, and like the sheep that before its shearers is silent, so he opened not his mouth. By oppression and judgment he was taken away, and as for his generation, who considered that he was cut off from the land of the living, stricken for the transgression of my people. Jesus Joseph's life is a picture and type of Jesus in the Old Testament, but Jesus who would come, who would literally fulfill these statements. On him, it says he was unjustly treated. Literally in the New Testament account, Pilate says these words, "You brought him to me, and nothing of what you said that he did has he done." Nothing worthy of conviction. I find nothing wrong with him. The very court that they convened late at night when they took him away by force, the Jewish court, was illegally convened, unjustly convened. And it said they actually paid people to say things about Jesus that weren't true. Unjust, 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 even to the very end, and Pilate saying, "I don't know what to do with him. I've got nothing on him." And the crowd yelled, "Crucify him." Pilate still determined to let him go until they turned it on him and said, "If you let him go, he claimed to be a king, and you are no friend of Caesar." A statement he could not let get back to Caesar. And he said, "Fine, but I wash my hands of him." How do we heal from the wounds of injustice because he was unjustly treated? Well, from the cross, Jesus showed us the way. Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they're doing. Father, forgive them, for they don't know what they're doing. Whether it is ignorance, arrogance, selfishness, those perpetrating injustice today are as broken as can be. And just like those screaming at Jesus, just like the circumstances that were unjust that led him to the cross to be tortured and crucified, Father, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing. There is a way out of the pain of injustice, and it requires, though, the way that Jesus gave us and modeled for us, and that is, I've got to choose to forgive. When I choose to forgive and I choose to let go, says I'll trust God to be just, but as for me, I want to do people good, even those who are my enemies, even those who have done wrong to me. That heart lands you, chapter 50. That heart lands you not killing your family, but saving their lives. That heart lands you where it landed him. In the book, The Insanity of God, Nick Ripkin tells the story, many stories, but one story of a man named Stoyan. Stoyan was a young boy sharing the story of what happened to his father in communist Russia after the war. And communism was spreading, and all the crackdown on religion, of course, in an atheistic culture, religion cannot prevail. Pastors, churches being rounded up, and his father was thrown into prison where he was, lots of things happened, not good. But one of the particular things, the first 9 months that he was there, they would bring him a piece of bread for his food, and the guard that brought him the bread smeared his own human feces on it before he brought him his only piece of food every day for 9 months. More things happened, things took place. Eventually, he was freed a long time down the road. And as he restored his health and began to minister again, one day, a Christian mama pleaded for his help. She had a son, middle-aged son, who was struggling with diabetes. It had caused blindness, and he was in tremendous pain, but they could not get medicine because they were Christians and they wouldn't give it to him. I could not get medicine. Is there anything you can do to help? Is there any way you can help? And he tried and tried and tried, and eventually he found and obtained the medicine this guy needed. And she said, would you bring it to him and would you pray over him? And so he came to the house with the medicine finally to give for the son. And when she led him into the room, he had the shock of his life when he realized that this blind invalid, middle-aged man laying on the bed was the same guard that spread the feces on his food every day for 9 months. And as he records what his father's thoughts were, as his father told the story, he said, it was in that moment I just said to my God, I said to the Lord, don't let me fail you in this moment. This is my moment. Don't let me fail you today. And of course, he gave the medicine and he prayed the prayers and never gave any indication of the past relationship and what he had done to him. He just chose to forgive and do him good. There's a lot of things that will be said about Christians in the church over the years. They have been said throughout years and years to come. I don't know what will be said about the church in this next decade in America. But this kind of life that you and I have been invited into, it's not a life of anger. It's not a life of feeling out of control and acting like people who have no God in their life. It is a life of, I know God is with me. Things may or may not always be just, but God is good and God is just. And my life is not at the mercy of things I can't control. People are not the enemy. There is an enemy, a very real one. Principalities and powers, spiritual forces of darkness. And yes, they'll work through people, but people are not our enemy. People are our goal. People are our joy. Whatever it takes that we might save some, that they might come to a saving knowledge of Jesus. I could say of my own life, and you could say of yours, that my life was saved through injustice. Jesus was unjustly treated on my behalf. Jesus took my punishment that I deserved, the penalty for my sin, upon himself. The wrath of God was poured out upon him because of the mistakes in my own life. Where's the fairness in that? That's unjust. But it says, he was pierced for my transgression. He was crushed for my iniquities, and upon him was the punishment that brought me peace. By his wounds I was healed. We all, like sheep, have gone astray. We've turned, every one of us, to his own way. And the Lord laid on him the iniquity of us all. Because God is just, God can't ignore my sin. So the only way God can have me is to deal with my sin. And so he said, I'll take it upon myself. That's why he had to come. I don't know what that produces in you, but it produces in me a tremendous gratitude for my God. Tremendous reminder of how loved I am and what it cost for me to be saved. And that's the reflection I want the world to see about my God, about our God. That's the reflection I want them to hear in what I say and how I say what I say. Injustice saved my life. Who needs to be forgiven in your life? You can be healed from injustice. It's a choice to let God be judge, to right whatever needs to be righted, and for you to say, Lord, I need a heart that's free, that knows you're with me. You're doing me good in the midst of the pain. You are still good and you are with me. You are with me. You are with me. You are with me. Would you stand?